So Unleash the Potential, we're back. We have an awesome guest today. I'm excited that he's here with us. Give us a little bit of time today. Stephen Wiedler from AIC Associate Head Coach, recruiting coordinator, on-ice skills, defensive coordinator, back-to-back championships. There's so many different things I'm so excited to touch on with you today. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know, hopefully we'll, in the next 45 minutes or so, we'll kind of be able to delve in and get as much value to everybody as possible. So,
no, really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Well, listen, let's kind of jump right into it. Do you want to, let's talk a little bit about how you got into hockey, right? From like how you started playing. You know, I know you played, you played a few years in the pros, and kind of, you know, just kind of your experiences that kind of brought you to where you are today.
Sure. I'm from Long Island, New York. Didn't grow up in a hockey family, but my dad was a huge Rangers fan, and definitely a hockey nut. And you know, played street hockey growing up. Started with roller hockey from I was probably 8 years old around there. Played roller hockey till I was about 11, and my dad put me into ice hockey. And then from 11 till now, been doing it on the ice. And along the way, there's different guys that have just, I don't know if it's luck or what it is, but I've been lucky enough to work with and skate with and be coached by some of the better coaches, especially from that area. And early on, as most youth players, like I couldn't skate. I was falling down more than I was standing up. And the guy that taught me a lot was Matt Dixon. He's a power skating coach. Now he's out of the Boston area, but at the time was living on Long Island, and he played at St. Lawrence. And he taught me everything there was to know about being a hockey player. And he kind of took me from the age of 13 until I was around 19 or 18, going off to junior. And he really showed me the ropes and developed me as a player and a human, and got me on the right track with my diet and off the ice and that kind of stuff. And then after that, you know, played high school hockey on Long Island, played AA actually for the Long Island Rebels for 3 or 4 years. And then went off to juniors, played for Al Rooney up in Hudson Valley, played junior A for 3 years. Went on to Elmira College, University of Southern Maine, and then ended up playing a couple years of pro. You know, again, along the way, it's just happened to be recruited by Al Rooney to go play juniors, and Al's an unbelievable coach in person. We still stay in touch and we're tight. And around the age of 19, I got linked up with Alexei Nikiforov, who's a world-renowned skills coach, and he works with the Islanders and everybody else, and he was able to develop my game more. And in college, I played for Jeff Beanie, who's you know, one of the great college coaches of all time. So I've been lucky as I go along the way. Got to play a couple years of pro, and yeah, just keep hockey's everything, right?
That's awesome. Well, you know, it's especially, I know for me, because I can think back to some of the coaches like when I grew up playing, and you know, there's specific guys. Like listen, there's always you learn from the good and the bad of every coach that you have, like
Sure.
What not to do, what to do, but then it's really cool when you really think about who really took you under their wing, and you know, and I know for us from a training standpoint, we always think of it as every person that's with us, we want to make sure that we're giving them everything we possibly can, because at the end, every little thing that you do, people remember that stuff, and
Yep.
they take and they move it on, and now they're doing that to the players that they're working with. And so it's really cool to think about like how Dixon, right? So
Yep.
like how, you know, how he left an impression for you.
Matt did, I can't even put into words what Matt Dixon did for me. And when we first got linked up with him, me and my dad, like I said, my dad doesn't come from a hockey background, so he couldn't really teach me, right, or coach me through things. He instilled work ethic and blue collar and all that, right. But he did not, you know, he couldn't teach me how to skate, and he couldn't teach me how to do how to be a hockey player. And right. Matt did. Matt saw something in me from a young age when I wasn't very good, and anything that I've developed into in my career was because of Matt Dixon. That's just the truth. That's, you know, if he didn't take me under his wing, and I was a chubby young kid who, you know, probably wasn't Didn't know what it took to be a serious athlete. And this was a guy that did it at the highest level of college hockey. So he knew. Without him, I wouldn't be here. That's for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's one of the coolest things. Like, and and kind of moving from that, you kind of mentioned how with that he kind of saw something in you, right? And not to jump in necessarily into this, so if you could kind of adjust and transition as you'd like with this, but
sure.
Now where you made the transition from D3 coaching, right?
Yep.
To D1 coaching. So, how was the recruiting process there compared to the recruiting process at D1? What challenges, how was all that kind of seeing the little pieces of each player?
Sure. I think coaching at Division III for 2 years was one of the greatest. Well, I worked for TJ Monastersky, who's an unbelievable Division III coach at Curry College, right outside of Boston. And he was great at there's a big transition from being a player to being a coach and understanding all the things that you don't realize as a player, what goes on behind the scenes as a coach. And TJ was great. He gave me so much ownership and freedom to grow and learn and dive into all the different aspects of it and wear a bunch of different hats. And he really developed me as a coach. And the thing that I see work in those 2 years was that I got to wear those different kinds of hats. And yes, the recruiting's a little different. I think maybe at the Division III level, it was about best player possible and accumulating talent.
Right.
But that being said, the Division III hockey is really high end, right? And there's a lot of Division III players that could be playing Division I. And from that standpoint, that didn't change as much, right? And I think there's things that I looked for at Curry College that are similar to what I look for at AIC. And, when you walk in a rink, if you don't have that hunger and that fire in your game, that's kind of just a base layer. You have to have it. And if that's not there, you're not going to really catch a scout's eye. Your skill set could be whatever it is. There's skill to being a defensive defenseman. There's skill to being a goal scorer. There's skill to just being a good center, right? So it's not necessarily always being the absolute prettiest player on the ice that has the best skill. It's about being the right fit for whatever program it might be. And that's what we do here at AIC more than anything. We recruit to an identity. So there's guys that we recruit that other schools probably wouldn't have ranked as high on their prospect list that we do because they fit our identity. So I guess that's the biggest thing for any of the the kids that you're training or the older guys that are right on the cusp of making D1 is be the best at what you are, because you never know what somebody's looking for. And everybody, you could go down the line of all the Division I recruiters, different things catch different guys' eyes.
Right.
So that was what I would say. And that's kind of, same thing. Division III, they're looking for certain things. Division I, they're looking for certain things, and it doesn't really matter,
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I try to, like when I talk to the guys about it, it's, I hate to say it this way, but it's the truth. You're a chess piece in a game, right? So like you have specific things that you're able to do. And, obviously we're all unique in our own way and all those other things, but like when it comes down to it, right? Like the coach looks at you as you're the gritty guy, right? You're the finesse guy. You're the goal scorer. You're the guy that I'm gonna look to, if there's a big penalty kill to go, you're definitely the guy that's going to stay on there for all, whatever, however it's all going down.
Sure.
No, that's really helpful, because I think that's one of the things that guys just forget about. Everybody wants to be that goal scorer. Everybody wants to be like that top player, but you can also be like a bottom of the line player. Well, bottom of the line as in like,
third, fourth line. Yep.
Exactly. Right. Like more gritty player, more something along the lines of that. And the team needs that. So
100%. And we built our program off of that here at AIC. And like you said, coming off back-to-back championships, we, for lack of a better term, we're not Boston University. Like I'm not walking in and finding first round draft picks to come play at AIC. It's just the truth. And we know what we are, and we're a hard skill team. And that's the way we built our program. So we have guys in our lineup that we forecast to do things that they're not sometimes not doing at the junior level. Now, don't get me wrong, we have some great players like Blake Christensen that just graduated. He played for the NDTP. Like he's an unbelievable player, right? And he signed a AHL contract with the Edmonton Oilers. And but for every Blake Christensen, we have another player in our program that he might have had 10 points in the USHL. Right. Comes to us and he's he leads our team in goals. Right. So, it development never is just a straight line up. There's peaks and valleys to it. Right. Your mindset is the most important thing. Your mindset's the most important thing. If you're a guy that's got a continual growth mindset and we call it an A mindset here, you can maximize your potential. So there's no limit. Just because you're on the third line or fourth line in the USHL, or you're a first liner in the NAHL or EHL or whatever league you might be playing in, U18, U16, some guys are late bloomers, and we got a ton of them we have a team full of them. So,
well, that's an interesting way to kind of transition to that. So one of the things that I saw is that not necessarily trying to get in on your secrets necessarily, not looking for your sauce, right? But just overall, one of the cool things that I saw is that when you recruit, you're looking, besides like the big places where the majority of scouts and everyone that's looking, right? Yep. You find players in a bunch of different areas, right? So what are you looking for? What are you, how are you talking about that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things there. I think the hockey world has shrunk down with all these different apps, websites. It goes on and on. The technology that we have now in college hockey, the world has shrunk. There's not as many hidden gems, like the old hidden gems. You go up into a northern part of Canada and you find this kid that's playing on a back rink, and oh my God, right? I don't know how much of that exists anymore. There's still those players out there, little diamonds in the rough, but you got to turn over every stone now because you have the availability to do so. Right. And it's kind of leveled the playing field as far as recruiting goes, because I can get out via that stuff and get a first look, and it doesn't matter on my budget, right? So for us, we know who we are. And you look at our roster. We have a kid that transferred from UNLV. He was playing club hockey, and a lot of people probably raise some question marks about that. But when you do your homework on the kid, he's an unbelievable kid from California, played in the BCHL, and he scored a boatload of goals in the BCHL. And then I think, without getting into too many details, there's little things that held him back from going to Division I originally. Right. And then, we're sitting down as a staff and we're talking, and our head coach brings it up, like, what happened to this kid? And just because he went to UNLV for a year, he's still a hell of a player. Right. And why shouldn't we talk to him? Why shouldn't we approach the conversation? Right. See where his mindset's at, what he's doing, how he feels, how he's been training, all that stuff. And so we just turn over every rock, and we have a player from the Western States Hockey League. We got tons of players from Europe. It's just in an effort to, you got to cast a rock. And we're not the big boys. So we're not walking in and saying first round draft pick, come sign with us. We got to do it different. And if we tried to recruit like BU or BC or any of those teams, North Dakota, if we tried to recruit like them and then play like them on the ice, we'd lose to them every time. It's a little bit of that Moneyball idea, right? We can't do that. We won't live that way. It won't work for us. We'll die that way as a program. So, it's nice that it worked. It's easy to say it now that it worked. It wasn't a sure thing 2 years, 3 years ago, 4 years ago when we were putting it together. But we stuck to it. We've made decisions because of culture and moved on because of culture. And I think that's been the consistent through everything is our culture has been really high, and that's led to our success in recruiting, on the ice, off the ice, all that stuff.
Well, let me ask you, so that's a great, so I'm a big believer in culture, like the way we are in our facility, and what I believe that creates for the players, right? Whether it's a compete factor, sure. A vulnerability factor, the ability to know that no matter what the situation is, I can come to the different people and I can ask the questions, and the family kind of kind of perspective there.
Yeah.
So, like, see, how do you, you know,
How do you cultivate it?
what's that?
How do you cultivate it?
Exactly.
Sure. You know what? This is a big thing for Coach Lang. And he came from West Point when he came over to us. And he, West Point develops leaderships, and nobody's got a better culture than West Point. Brian Riley and what his staff does over there is unbelievable, right? And they're developing elite human beings. And, you know, by being a piece of that for a good amount of time, you know, Coach Lang was able to pick it apart, learn it, be a part of it, and bring it with them. And he's instilled one here. And I think on day one, when we were trying to turn this thing around, we were the worst team in the country. We did a lot of culture guarding, right? Coach Lang would always say that we're the guardians of the culture, and we have to guard it every day. So if you don't correct it, you accept it. That's his big thing. So if something happens, you see it or you get wind of it and you don't correct it, then don't be mad about it when it starts to fester in your locker room or grow from there because you didn't correct it. So you don't correct it, you're going to have to accept it because it's on you, right? So that was a lot of year one, was us doing it. In the recruiting of year one, we're looking for guys that were captains, you know, guys that display good culture on the ice. You know, whether they're up or down, their body language doesn't change. They're always working their hardest, little culture things like that on the ice in the recruiting. And then when you talk to the coaches in the recruiting, dig back to you know, if a kid's a 20-year-old, dig back to a U18 coach that had him in a random place in Colorado, right? And find out, get the whole picture of the kid. A lot of times you'll be surprised by the stories that you get. And the stories always give you a better picture of who the kid is, who the kid was, and how he's grown. And make sure you're bringing those pieces into your program. And then the beauty of it is when you could add that kind of culture piece through recruiting, and you have a head coach that's guarding it and a staff that's guarding it every day, it becomes player driven. And now the players have ownership of it. And you could kind of, as a coaching staff, can let off the reins a little bit. You're still looking for the bigger red flags, but the players it's so player driven. They're taking care of it on a daily basis and guarding it and coming to you when they have to and dealing with things on their own when they have to. And that's how you get there. And that's where you want to be. I think that's the player driven culture is the biggest, you know, is one of the greatest things that you could have as a program. And we got it here right now. So we're enjoying the fruits of that and what happens when your players just take ownership of your program and they lead the way.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's one of the things I think that, you know, it's interesting because so I also do a lot of work with youth teams, and it's tough because when there's a pay to play model, right, compared to a, you know, you're being covered on that end of it, right? It's, you know, how much you have to let go some of that stuff, right? Because again, you have to have a certain amount of players come into your program. You have to make sure that, again, there's the financial model with that whole thing. And of course that's in everything, but no, so that's interesting because that's the other part. How did you, so especially being in you know, making that change from a culture perspective, what, you know, how do you balance all right, I'm going to smack you down, bring it down, right? Like rule with the iron fist compared to, you know, let things kind of, you know, correct themselves.
Yep. I don't think there's a lot of times where we ruled with an iron fist, as crazy as that sounds. I think you have to exhaust every possible resource before you come to the conclusion of we have to move on from this player. And I just say that because I truly think there's not a ton of bad people. Like there's not a lot of bad kids. They might have a different story. You might have to coach them differently or approach them differently or learn more about them. But like I said, maybe they don't want to talk to you specifically as their coach because they're scared that it's going to reflect on their ice time, whether it will or won't. Like, you know, there's all those kind of things behind the scenes. So that's what I mean by exhaust every. Is there something at the school? Is there a program at the school you could use? Is there a counselor at the school? Is there another coach that they trust? Is there a U18 coach that they trust? Is there, you know, do they have an advisor that they trust? Are you tight with mom and dad? You know, is there a teammate that you should lean on to get to them and send the message, right? all those kinds of things before you, and there's more than that, but before you can decide, okay, this player can't be a part of our program. So I think ruling with an iron fist would be kind of moving on from somebody, but I think that would be, to me, that's like something happens and it's a snap reaction.
Right.
And we, we're calculated when we do it. There's no snap reactions, and we make sure we have the whole story and understand it and try to support it and try to fix it and correct it and show the right way to do things and operate with a level of professionalism and accountability that would get the guy on the right track. But that doesn't always happen. So when that goes awry and, you just can't help the player, sometimes you got to move on, because culture, and you know what, we've moved on from guys that have gone on to other programs and they've been great players. And he just wasn't the right fit at AIC, but he could be the right fit somewhere else. And that's what it is. And that's, like I said, there's no bad kids. He just wasn't the right fit here. That's it.
I think it's great that you're making that point, because I think players, from a confidence standpoint, from a, label standpoint, right?
Yep.
Just because something didn't work out for you in one place, right, doesn't mean that that's the situation. You just didn't fit in that, in that program, in that culture. Yep. That wasn't your culture.
Yep.
And I think it's cool to see, like, kind of like you said, like when a player goes from one place to another and does, or when a player goes from like one place where they're not doing great,
yep.
Not fitting, they go to another place and they start crushing it. And I know so many times, people go, you see, they made a mistake by not, keeping
yep.
that player. When really it's not that we made a mistake. It's just we saw that we weren't looking for the same thing. Yep. We're happy for the part, right? Like it's really cool that you're saying that, Steve. Yeah.
No, it's good for him. And you know what? It happens on the recruiting trail. Like there's kids that are in our league or in other programs in Division I. We've been doing this 5 years now. There's guys that are signing pro that we passed on, right? That we didn't think fit, right? And then they go to that sometimes in your league and they're torturing you,
right?
And it's easy to be like, man, we messed up. But they just weren't, from what we saw and the homework that we did, they weren't the right fit. Do you always get it right? No. You mess up. We mess up more than anybody. We're not perfect. And so same thing for the players. They can't always get it right either. And they're human. There's a human element to this thing, big time. And if you start forgetting that, that's when you get yourself in trouble. You got to invest in the player and the human being more than anything else.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really, it's refreshing to hear that, because so many times you hear, often if you're listening in the,
sure.
More negative comes out than the positive. So it's really cool to hear that.
Well, you know what? It is a business. Like, it's Division I athletics, right? And at the end of the day, we're mostly judged on wins and losses, right? There's academics and how our kids do in school and how they are in the community, and all that kind of stuff pays into it. And at the end of the day, as coaches, we're developing men to go out into the world and be leaders and be successful in the real world. But at the end of the day, we're also judged on wins and losses. And if you lose a lot more than you win, that could go the wrong way for you. So that's a realistic part of it. There is a professionalism to it, and that's part of the whole picture. And guys have to understand that. And yeah, like I said, wrong fit at AIC or just not the right fit at AIC doesn't mean that you're not going to be the right fit somewhere else. And you might be a great fit and you might blossom and develop. And we're just happy for you that happens.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. I think that's one of the biggest things that everyone that needs to really think about, and not just in hockey, like you said, in life, right? Because you're creating men. All the experiences that we have, through our college, our high school days, our youth days, like, all of that, right? Yep. It's all building blocks for who we are as we move forward. And I think, how we deal with situations where, something terrible happens to you, you feel like it's the end for you, when really it just wasn't the right fit. And you need to go a different way. Sure. Relationships, right? Like the whole thing. So I think it's just a really cool lesson to kind of take, that just because right now the situation you're being let go, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being let go. It just means that, look, I'm going to let you go so you can find your answer, yep, your solution, and that kind of thing. So
for sure. 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, one of the other things I kind of wanted to get into with you also is, So through the years, like, is there something specific that kind of, that might have, from your playing days, kind of touching on all that, your playing days, that kind of everything moving forward, your coaching style now, right? The culture that you got to create. I know you talked about some of the coaches that you've taken a lot from.
Yep.
Is there maybe a couple things that you feel that you'd like to share that maybe, what, and again, you don't have to mention names on that side of it, but the positive and the negatives that you kind of saw that you were in a program, and it doesn't matter what age it was, but just there was a program, a certain coaching style that said, this is definitely not the way I want to be when I'm, moving forward, or something like that. Anything kind of stick out to you when you think about that?
Sure. I'm a big, listen, if you look at my, even my college career, right? I played for 2 schools, and when I was at Elmira College, we had an unbelievable team. We went all the way to the Final Four of the NCAA tournament, and we were ranked first in the nation for a long time that year. And I didn't play a game my freshman year, not a single game. I just sat in the stands with my suit and tie on, and man, was that getting old. That happens, right? And it's just like you said, it wasn't the right fit for me and the coaching staff. They just, lack of a better term, they didn't think I was a heck of a player. They recruited me and brought me in, and when I got there, maybe I just wasn't what they thought, or I didn't fit what they were trying to do, or the depth chart was what it was. And either way, I think there was 2 ways to look at that situation. And you can either just be completely negative about it, or you could pull the good things from it. And the one thing that, moving on, right, and I transferred to Southern Maine, the one thing that I brought from Elmira with me was Elmira taught me how to win. Those guys, especially in that era, if you look at those, that like 5-year window around when I was there, they were in the NCAA tournament like 6 years in a row or something like that. And that coaching staff knew how to win on the ice, and those players knew how to win. And the other thing that I got from them is how a strong culture can lead to winning. Because Elmira, when I was there, did have a great one. And, Coach Saul, who's there now, was an assistant back then, and he was a huge part of it. And you bled purple when you were there. So just learning that, even for a guy that wasn't playing and was sitting in the stands and was working, 4 days a week practicing and never getting that, I guess, paycheck of playing, doing all the work without a paycheck, it still instilled that in me. So you can take a positive out of a negative. Now I bring that over to Southern Maine, and I've had that instilled in me and built up in me, and it translates, and I get an opportunity in Southern Maine that I didn't get at Elmira, and I had, developed, and I'm able to become voted a captain as a senior and all that stuff, and you go on from there. But that's like, for me, that's one of those spots, right? I could have very easily just trashed Elmira and said it wasn't a good experience, and I got to move on, but I don't, and I didn't, and I don't blame the staff that was there for what happened. They were probably right. Maybe I wasn't that good, right? So, you got to take the positives even out of the negatives. And like I said before, along the way, I've been lucky enough to have guys that have given me instruction. Alexei Nikiforov took over later in my career for me as a skills guy when Matt Dixon moved away from the island, and he was able to take a guy that was a good skill and he couldn't teach me all the skill that I needed, right? Because I just wasn't a big skill player, but he made me a little bit better in that area, or he at least taught me how to do some of the deception things and helped me on the breakout and all those kinds of things. So you get little pieces from everybody. And if you just have the right outlook, or you look through the correct lens, start building those pieces together. And it's no different if you're a coach or a player. Coaching career, I got, Eric Lang, Gary Wright, TJ Manistersky, and Jeff Beanie, who have helped me along the way. And there's been others. Brian Riley's been great to me, and all this. And I'm probably forgetting a couple guys that have helped me out here in my coaching career. And you take pieces of them too, and you build yourself and you learn, and that's just how it is at any walk of life, I think.
Yeah, that's because like you said, it's continuous development, right? There's no point in being in a situation for a certain amount of time and then not taking something from it and just looking at it as a negative situation. Because it might have been a negative situation, it might have been a terrible situation, but what did you take from it? Because bottom line is we only have a certain amount of time on this planet, right?
Yep.
So we might as well take everything and make ourselves the greatest that we can be.
Sure.
So that's awesome. So now with that coming up, so for some of the players, some of the parents, I know there's a lot of guys that, I think it's a lesson for them as well, but there's a lot of guys that it kind of sucks because one, they're missing out on playoffs, right? That like this year they might have had an amazing season, or they didn't have the greatest season. They were looking, they were starting to get hot,
Yeah.
and there's schools that were talking to them that, hey, let me see you in the playoffs, and setting that situation up. For those guys, right, or the guys right now that were, are leaving, let's say, prep school and are looking to get into the next junior league, and do you have any thoughts, any advice for them to how they can right now? Because again, you can only control what you can control, right?
Yep.
So you can't be on the ice necessarily. So what can guys be doing right now that if a school was interested in them, right? What can they be doing to maybe continue that relationship with them, continue to have them talking besides their advisor, because obviously advisors or agents or whatever the situation is there, but any advice there, kind of what they could be doing right now to kind of help themselves not lose these last few months that have been tough for them?
Sure. I think there's a couple things there. I mean, it's a unique opportunity in the sense that you can really build a relationship here. And I've had players that we're recruiting who I've had the opportunity to talk with more in depth than I would have, and learn more about them, and they're learning more about me. So that's a little bit of a positive out of this thing is sometimes, and I know it's starting to lighten up now, but in the past month or so, like being locked in your house, there's a phone and a computer, and
right.
and what else are you going to do? Right. So if you're a player, and I've had recruits do this, and it was guys that maybe we showed some interest in, but not a ton of interest, they started reaching out to me more than they would have been just waiting for me to call them. Right. And you always, as a coach, entertain those conversations, and maybe you flip a little something in a coach's mind from building that relationship, and they start to think about you more as a human than just a player out on the ice, and you could foster that relationship more and more. If you were a guy that maybe wasn't getting a ton of interest, I think you should do your research. It's a great opportunity with not a lot going on to hop on that computer and really be honest with yourself and research the different institutions. Like, make sure that it's an academic fit, that it's a social fit, and an athletic fit. And that could be Division III, Division I, junior leagues, whatever it is. Find out more about that program and really do your homework. And then once you got it narrowed down to those, 4 or 5 that you think could be a great fit for you, whether, like I said, junior, Division III, Division I, whatever it may be, get in contact with those staffs and shoot them an email. And don't have your parents do it. You take ownership of it and do it yourself, and hop on the phone, shoot a text, set up a time to call, whatever it may be. Because you have the opportunity now to really do the homework on the people that are running the program as a whole, whether it be an institution or a junior program, and you could really get that surrounded and understand the whole picture behind that thing. And then I think the other thing is just, it would be a waste if you didn't continue to try to develop in some way your game, right? And it could be a unique opportunity to get your diet in order, right? You can't go and eat the fast food as easy because you're not allowed to go out, right? So maybe it's a good time to start eating healthier. Maybe, heck, you could find a place to shoot a puck, drop 300 pucks down and rip shots, right? Like, make sure you're developing some piece of your game, body weight workouts if you don't have a gym. You could develop some aspect of your game that maybe was lacking a little bit, and just move the needle an inch for yourself there, in some area. So I would, if I was a prospect right now, and in retrospect from what I know now, if I could build relationships and do my homework on a program and then build my game in some area, foot speed with a ladder, whatever it may be, don't waste the opportunity to do that.
So that's an interesting thought, because so for a player who, because I think one of the hard parts, I think for players, and especially with a lot of the guys that I've talked to, so you have relationships with a bunch of different junior programs, right? Whether it's coaches, organizations, and
Sure.
a bunch of different places. By it's a back and forth communication, right?
Sure.
So I guess one of the things that I see for players that they hear juniors and they hear free, they're not gonna have to pay. Like again, we're talking about between NCDC, NHL, USHL, BCHL, just go down the line of different, right? Where it's free.
Yep.
They hear that and they choose a team. What's a good way? Because, I've had a couple players that have had situations where they went to a team, they thought they did the research, they talked to the coach, and again, there's a sales pitch, obviously, that's going to be a part of that as well, right?
Sure.
Are there any questions that you think that are good to really get an idea of what the culture's like, what the player, like, what's a good way for a player to start, reaching out, communicating? Because again, like I'm sure there are a good amount of people that are reaching out to you. So what's like a good way or a good start for you that you think that for players to do?
Sure. I don't know if it's a day one question, but as you're going through a relationship and building one, you can just, I think when you come through the front door a lot with questions, rather than trying to beat around the bush about one, you'll get more out of it. So just asking a coach, where do you see me in the lineup? As a person what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are as a player or a human, and you have an idea or a picture in your head of who you are and what your skill set is. So like you just ask that simple question, where do you see me, or what do you think of me as a player, or that kind of question. And based on their answer, you can kind of figure out a little bit of what kind of a fit it is. Like, if you know that your strength is being hard and fast and forechecking and whatever, I don't have a specific player in mind, but if that's your skill set, and the player and the coach is talking about your goal scoring ability when you didn't have goal scoring, well, did he really see you?
Right.
Did he really watch you? Does he know who you are? Are you going to be set up for success when you get there? So that's part of it. And I think figuring out just who wants you the most, like you got to go where you're loved or wanted.
Right.
And sometimes you're wanted more from maybe not as, I don't have a great term, not as sexy of a program or an institution. They want you more, and you want to go to that really cool looking, like the optics of when you put it out on Twitter, you're committing to this junior program or this college, and the optics of your buddies saying how sweet that is, versus what's going to actually set you up for success and what's actually the best fit for you. And you got to weigh that out, and you got to be smart enough to read between the lines on the simple way to do it is, these guys have shown me the most love. They want me the most. So they've invested the most. And when a coach of any kind invests a lot in a player, he's going to give that player the benefit. It's natural human. Like, he's going to give that player the benefit of the doubt more. So you're going to have more of a chance to succeed when they're more invested in you. Right. It's just that simple. So, just those would be my two things. Try to gauge if he really knows you, and try to find the one that's giving you the most love.
So now, and just kind of topping off that as well, what's a good way to ask about, let's say, like for you, right? Like if someone said to you, well, coach, and obviously I'm not expecting them to necessarily say it this way, but
sure.
They ask you that the questions that you just asked, right?
Sure.
When you see me, like, what do you think of me, and that kind of stuff, right? And then what if you want to figure out about the culture, right? So what's another follow-up question where you're not, that you would look at and be like, I respect that this player asked, rather than, did he really just say that?
Yeah. I think there's a way to navigate that. I honestly don't know if there's a ton of players that, ask that question or come through the front door with that question.
Well, like I had a couple players that have gone through some experience in the past couple of years that I know they will be asked that question moving forward because of some of the things that happened. So they realized when they got there, they're like, whew, this
Yep.
was not what I was told.
Sure. And I think doing your homework is somewhere where you can find a lot of that, because when you're talking to the actual, me included, when you're talking to the institution, a
Right.
coach, a program, they're selling you,
Right.
right? Like they want, they've targeted you, they've invested, they've been, for me, I've been away from my family and my kid watching you play in some obscure location of the country.
Right.
Like I'm very invested in you. And I'm going to paint this picture as best I can because I want you to be a part of our family,
Sure.
right? Now, if you come through the front door and ask me that, I'm going to answer it
Right.
to the best of my ability. But for, talking about general purposes, I would call around to people that you trust that have either been through it, play in the league. Like if you have a buddy that plays in the league, nobody knows better than what it's like to play in that rink.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows if somebody played in the program already, maybe got out a couple years ago. Like say you don't even have to know the person really. Like, so say you were training a kid 3 years ago, he played at a junior program, he's moved on. And now you have a younger kid that's playing. You got the common link there with the junior programs. Just your younger kid should come to you and say, hey, can you connect me with so-and-so? I want to ask about their experience and what it was like. And it's the same thing for college programs. And you got to surround the thing. This way you get the whole picture. Just like we're doing about the kids and recruiting.
Right.
When we're digging back and surrounding it, that's how we're getting an idea about your culture. You could do the same thing about any given program. Surround it and get the right, try to paint as best a picture you can for what's really going on there. And nobody knows better. Nobody knows better than the people that are in the locker room or on the ice doing it, that lived it, right? So that would be my advice there. You could talk to the coach about it, but you always got to understand, it's important to understand the lens that the other person that you're talking to is looking through, right? So I'm looking through the lens of AIC hockey. I'm paid to protect the interests of AIC hockey. And I got to build this program and continue to win championships. So that's my lens, right? And you have a lens as a trainer, and it moves on and on, right? So you got to understand that part. But I think surrounding it and getting around it and digging and doing your homework would be the most important thing for that culture aspect for a player.
I think those are really good points there, because I think that really opens it up. Because I think there's just a lot of guys that are afraid to reach out and say something because they feel like if this ruins my chances. And I mean, like, I think coming back to what you said a little earlier is if a coach just put time into you and you ask a question and they get mad at you and they don't want you anymore because, you asked a question like that and they're offended, then you probably don't want to be there anyway, because that relationship's not going to work out anyway.
No, more times than not, when a kid does ask a question that's pointed and straight, you respect it as a coach and you answer it. And there's a lot of times where that happens and I turn around, like we get done with the call and I talk to the rest of the staff and recruiting me, and this kid has a level of professionalism and this kid has ownership. He's taken ownership of his hockey career and his schooling, and he wants to make sure he finds the right fit. So he's asking the questions, and everybody always has questions, and there's a lot of guys that just don't ask them. I would say, like you're saying, you got to ask the questions.
That's awesome. Yeah. Coach, I think that's all I got.
Okay.
I listen, I'm going to tell you, I know that's not true. I have plenty more, but I really appreciate you giving us as much time as you have.
Sure.
And I mean, is there anything you'd like to kind of end on, put out for the players, or just anything you'd like to kind of touch on? Because like I said, I just really appreciate you giving us some time and kind of going through all this.
Yeah, I don't really have a ton. I thought it was a unique opportunity to hop on with you and maybe spread our story, AIC story a little more. You're training players over there and you're talking with, and you got people following you. And I thought this was great all around. I thought your questions were great and I enjoyed it. So it was a lot of fun. I'll hop back on anytime.